Welcome, everybody, to today's Win-Loss Wednesday. Today, we're going to be talking about convincing stakeholders to invest and keep investing in win-loss. My name is Sheila Lehar. I'm the Senior Director of Content Marketing here at Crayon. For those that are unfamiliar, Crayon is a competitive intelligence software platform. I'm joined by two of my colleagues on the marketing team at Crayon. We've got Caitlin and Connor, and I'm also joined by Scott Frost, who's our guest today. For those who may not know Scott, he's been in competitive intelligence for years with some really well-known companies you've probably heard of, like Stripe, Adobe, and New Relic, just to name a few. So Scott, thank you so much for taking time today and being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited to talk about win-loss today.
Yes, definitely. This is an exciting topic and a topic I think many of us can relate to. Before we actually jump into our first question, we're going to run a quick poll. So we're going to have everyone answer this quick question to understand what stage you're all at in your win-loss program. So 3 choices here in terms of where you're at. We don't have a formal program yet, but it's on the agenda. We're in the early phase of incorporating win-loss into our Compete program, or win-loss is very much part of your CI efforts today, and you're just looking for some additional tips and tricks, which is what brought you here today. So we'll let that, leave that up for maybe another couple seconds, let people choose where they're at. And then Caitlin, when you're ready, you can show us the results there and you can see what the audience makeup is today. Okay, pretty evenly-ish split. 22% don't have a formal program yet, but on the agenda. A lot of you are in the early phases of incorporating win-loss, which is perfect for today's discussion. And then a bunch of you it's very much part of your program, just looking for some best practices, some tips, which we will provide for you today. So with that, I can jump to the first question here for Scott. So addressing win-loss sort of in tough economic times. Many of us on the call, you're in tech. The past few months, maybe years, haven't been the easiest. Scott, when you're talking to stakeholders and leadership in your org and potentially asking them for resources for win-loss, or maybe even competitive intelligence in general, how do you address this sort of not so subtle elephant in the room of this, uncertainty in the economy, and you're asking for something? Like, how do you go about doing that and trying to convince people in times like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question. It's a great way to start this conversation. I'll just because of the way the survey results, it's starting a win-loss program or investing deeper into your win-loss program, right? But asking for more in a time when everybody emotionally feels like we don't even have what we need. I've seen colleagues leave. I've seen budgets slashed. I'm not allowed to travel, right? These are all realities of either businesses being very fiscally conservative or real issues happening in your balance sheet. The question that you have to ask your executive leaders is this: is there ever a better time than right now to start or to invest deeper in win-loss? With less people, less time, money, and resources, the way that you invest right now as a company is more important than ever, right? Because you have less to invest with. So you've got to make what you have count more. So then the question becomes, well, what part of win-loss, like what part does win-loss play in that? The truth is unless you understand where you're winning and where you're losing, and when I mean where, I mean which products, which geos, right, against which competitors. Unless you understand those things, you can't be more prescriptive in terms of how you respond and invest. So win-loss becomes more important during these times, maybe than even it was prior to these times, because you can't spread your wealth as much. The other thing I'd say is, usually in large companies, company size makes a difference, and we'll probably talk more about that, but usually in larger companies, there's another group doing some form of win-loss. It could be a sales leader who's reporting through Salesforce. It could be, an M&A or a strategy team reporting. But unless you have the dimensions to decide where do I focus my limited marketing resource, where do I focus my limited investigation resource on, like the thing that will make is the lowest hanging fruit or the biggest impact to revenue and a bottom line, unless you have that level of detail, you still have a justification to your leadership for win-loss. So I would argue that your weight right now and your voice right now in your organization is probably more relevant and louder than it would be otherwise. So it's actually a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. And what if you're sort of on the smaller end of that? So yeah, if you're in a bigger organization, you address that. But what if you're sort of maybe like mid-market SMB? So you have maybe even less resources. How do you think, and like I said, in these tough times, you can go to bat for win-loss?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends upon the organization. We can talk a little bit more about, you know, where you find sponsorship in your organization. I think is an important question, but on the smaller side, the justification is, hey, we're lean and mean right now. We have very little in terms of resource. I can spend my time creating collateral, and others can spend their time creating collateral and positioning and strategy messaging and not know whether it's going to count or not. Or I can spend my time answering the question of where will it count most, right? So there probably is a hybrid in between. Then it becomes, what's the right level of information for your small organization to get a directional sense of where to invest, and how many other people do you have doing those other jobs, right? You're probably one of the few people in your organization, if you're new, that's really focused on that question of, how do I get better information to make better decisions? And right now, since I have less people, we have to be extremely prescriptive. So shouldn't I be the person, or my team, or shouldn't there be someone spending time on that function so that we can make sure that everyone else, basically we're magnifying the effect of everyone else and focusing on revenue. So I think in a small organization, it's the same argument as the larger organization. It's just, you might think of it as percentage of your job, or talking about the magnification effect and making sure you get it right for everyone else you do have, versus the business environment at large and like why it's important. You're going to talk specifically about what happens if those people don't focus on the right things. What happens to your customer? What happens to your bottom line? What happens to this company, right? Because I think in a small company, in a big company, it's not really risking the company. In a small company, it may very well, especially depending on how long these times run.
Yeah, and it is sort of the same message, but just reframing things a little bit differently, depending on, of course, like what resources you currently have and what your setup is like at your organization. And you mentioned sponsorship and executive sponsorship, which leads us into sort of a step one. We have 3 steps that we're going to go through today, is just related to buy-in, right? So we'd love to take some time to discuss how someone should go about thinking about getting an executive sponsor for win-loss, if that hasn't been done before, or if it's still sort of early. And maybe the first part of that is, if you're at a larger company potentially, how do you even go about like picking an executive sponsor? So there's sort of like 2 parts to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the first thing is the dynamic between you and the individual who you're going to ask for sponsorship from needs to be positive. You need to see this person actually care about the issues that you want to represent and drive, meaning good information to make better decisions, right? You need to find someone who is open to receiving information or messages that are unexpected or that they may not agree with, and be willing to listen and kind of listen to all the data come in, right? You need someone who is well respected in the organization and is in the right meetings and in the right position to share your findings, or to sponsor you to share your findings in that audience, right? So that you can distribute the information effectively. So your choice of sponsor in a large organization is important. You need remember that if they do sponsor you, it's not just flippant, it's not just a procedure. For most senior executives, when they sponsor you, if you don't look good, if you don't deliver something of value, their choice is looked upon in a negative light, right? They only have so much opportunity to sponsor. They're bringing you to the table, arguing that what you're going to do is effective and valuable. And if you let them down, then they take a hit as well. So you have to really understand the dynamic of sponsorship. You absolutely need a sponsor, but you need someone that you have a relationship with, that you can communicate with, that you can be transparent with without panicking them if there are problems. And almost inevitably, there always is something that's not quite where you want it to be. But that also is willing to really trumpet your successes and take them as their own. So the profile is important and the choice is important.
Yeah, and you mentioned relationships there. In a previous session we did with Jade Phillips, she talked about just how important relationships are in this role. Before you're going about asking quite different groups for different things, and she really stressed just the importance of building those relationships as the foundation. And it's going to make your program run much smoother. It's going to make your job easier if you have those relationships, and if you spend that time really building and cultivating those, which you're mentioning as well, is just making sure you're going to someone that you trust and that you already have the relationship with to help you.
Yeah, and I mean, what I get from a lot of folks that are newer CI practitioners is, Scott, I understand the need and the idea. I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't actually know how to reach out. And the key to that is understanding what that person needs, right? Asking the right questions. If you show up and you say, hey, I'd love for you to sponsor me, and they don't know much about CI, they're going to be like, well, why would I sponsor something I don't understand? Or if they do understand, but it's not aligned with your understanding, you can do a really good job and still fail, right? So the conversation starts with, tell me the kinds of gaps that you think exist today in terms of what we know. Help me understand better from your perspective, where there is a need within the company for better information. And if they can't articulate it that way, what are your peers talking about that's concerning to you? What are you debating because you don't feel like there's enough actual hard information in the conversation to lead you to a good outcome or to an alignment, right? You can ask the question in a few different ways. It's all basically the same question, which is, where are there gaps in information that you need? It's not so much about that sponsor's perspective as it is about that sponsor's access to hear what the C-level or execs are thinking about, or what the key questions, again, another way to ask it, what are the key questions that executives are asking or seeking answers to right now?
Yeah, so just curiosity. Curiosity is the first step that gets you there. If you're a little nervous, if you're not sure, how this is going to be accepted, or you haven't. You have the relationship, but you're still sort of apprehensive about asking, just start asking the business questions that you're curious about, and that they find those gaps, and that should help you along that process.
And human interest. If you don't know this person very well, showing interest in their perspective, showing interest in their experience, right? In your experience, how are these decisions typically made at other companies here, right? What you're trying to do is build both a human connection with the person and some mutual respect for the fact that you're interested in serving a need, whether they understood the need before, or through your questioning, you're illuminating that there actually is a justification for the function, for win-loss, those types of things. Yeah.
Got it. And I feel like executive sponsorship, it can look different depending on the type of organization you're at. There might be like different types of buy-in at different organizations. Can you speak to that a little bit, Scott? Because you've been at different size organizations, different kinds of organizations. I feel like that would be helpful.
Yeah, I have. So for the 22% of you that are trying to justify getting win-loss going, and you might be looking for sponsorship, your organization may very well be a ask forgiveness, not permission type organization. You need to understand your culture. If you ask these questions, it may not be an official sponsor. If you just ask these questions from leaders in your organization, maybe you do 2 or 3 of these, and you go and you meet a very basic need, by default, they may say, okay, this is important, we want more, right? Because people who are seeking answers and they see the answers come, or they see the opportunity for the answers to come, will sign up and say, we need more of this. And once you get that charge, you're like, great, who do I work with on the exec team to sort of coordinate really getting this moving as a function? You now have your sponsor. So you backed into it. You asked for forgiveness, not permission. You found the key things that you wanted to answer because you talked to a few leaders, so they're familiar with it. You answered those questions. There's a long list of others, or other information that's needed. Some of it may be systematic, like we need this on an ongoing basis. Some of it may be one-off, but you've created a sponsor through demonstrating a capability, right? And that's what typically will work in a smaller organization. In a mid-sized organization that is entertaining win-loss and wants win-loss, there probably is someone doing it, as I said before, in like an ad hoc basis. And I think so for the 40% that's like, we're doing it, but we're not doing it really well, I would argue that you really need to figure out what's most important. Typically, what's most important is, where are we having success in sales? What geographies, if you're beyond, geography or territory, but if you're beyond the US, certainly it's geography. What geographies are we having that success in? And with which products? So which customer segment, which product, which geography or territory? If you don't know and you can't figure out what people are looking for and you stick to that recipe, I think you're in good stead to start answering those questions. Because if you can slice those dynamics, people will start asking additional questions. People will say, wow, this is super valuable. How do we get this on an ongoing basis? Right? That other person, you should not look at that salesperson that was running a report or a strategy team that's running. You shouldn't be looking at those people as competition or as combative with you. They're collaborative with you. They're doing the best that they can with the time that they can allocate to those things. They may want to own the function. Don't get into a debate about, should you do this or should I do this? Just get into a debate of like, how can I be additive? How can I incorporate what you're doing into what I'm doing? How can I collaborate with you? But really staying focused on like those three dynamics is the basis of win-loss. And then for a large company, for those of you that are looking for like advanced tips, I think a lot of us know that like our CRMs never have clean data or the right data. And there's obviously a lot of augmentation with other data sets that you need in order to round out a great win-loss program. I would encourage you to work with sales ops or to work with your sales leaders to figure out, how do I not to force your salespeople to give you the information about the deals, but rather, how do I make them want to give me the information? Right. And so typically what people do is say, well, if you give me better information, I can give you better outcomes for your next deal. Salespeople are relatively mercenary, right? They want to do the right things, but they're focused on revenue for this customer for this quarter right now. So that approach philosophically makes sense, but emotionally, it doesn't always move the needle. What do you do to get them to help you? Well, in a session I was in recently, somebody said, well, what we do is in the Salesforce field, if they don't select a competitor, we just default to didn't ask. I promise you, if you have a report go to your senior executive management that says you never asked who you're competing against, that's going to be questioned by your senior leaders. And so in response, salespeople are like, hey, I got to select who I'm competing against in the CRM deal, because I don't want to look that way to my boss. I did ask. Okay, great. Make the selection. As CI professionals, we get the information. Now I have better information. Without forcing you per se, but really incentivizing you by your own interests, your own needs, right? Also, like some people with CRM data, if you don't put the CI information, CI survey in, you don't get paid, right? It will not move to commission without that piece. And then you design the field so that they can't just put NA, and hit center. I don't mean to disparage salespeople. There's a lot of people that really work hard and want to share as much information as possible. Those are typically not the folks that have poor data entry. But those are a couple things that I think are good keys for like helping to improve the quality of the data you have coming in, so you have less rework and normalization to get to an answer.
Yeah, all really good tips there. And just good tips for this particular section around building relationships, consider the structure of your company, consider the culture of your company, all things to think about when you're trying to get executive sponsorship for win-loss. I think we have a couple questions that are coming in related to this particular topic within the discussion. So Caitlin, do you want to shout out any that we're seeing here in the chat?
Yes, we have one from Sarah Lynn. They said, my biggest challenge has been to change my own skill set that finds a particular kind of CI to understand the whole salesperson's perspective and find data that they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sales empathy is an incredibly important part of being a CI professional. I carried a bag early in my career, so I understand what it's like to be standing in front of a customer and trying to sell. I've also been on the technical sales side. So like understanding the difference. I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, you can go on calls with salespeople. You can see how hectic and how little time they have to consume the information that you're providing. I would encourage you to sit with your salespeople If it's like running calls, I would encourage you to implement something like Gong or another type of tool where you can audit listening to their calls with customers. I would encourage you to talk, like, not about CI, but talk about, what does your day look like? What are the things that stress you out? How much of it is cyclical? How much of it is event driven? If you haven't had the chance to be a salesperson, developing that empathy is really important. If you're trying to figure out what salespeople care about, they care about anything that affects their deal or affects them getting paid. That's what they care about. And that's what you want them to care about. The question is, how do you convince them that what you have is going to help them make more money and is a better use of their time than like calling 5 more people and trying to generate a new lead, right? And the answer is, it has to align with making them more money, making the customer more money, or saving the customer money, because that's what the customer cares about, or teaching them new skills to learn more about how to win with better information than what their competition has, right? It really comes down to that, and convincing of that. And that comes down to being very prescriptive with when you talk to them, what you know versus what you think versus what you suspect, so that they can rely upon you. And then getting a few key wins with deals. Salespeople talk, they're tribal. They'll say that was super helpful for me, and he or she helped me win that deal. So, figuring out what they want on the top level is very straightforward. Figuring out how to deliver it and then to get that circle of value to come full circle is a little bit trickier, but engage. That's the biggest thing. Engage with your salespeople and build empathy for their job.
I love it. Yeah, empathy is so important. Good tips there around just how you can better sort of interact and communicate with sales. And you said one thing about what you know versus what you suspect, which kind of leads us into the next section. So letting the data speak for itself. When we were talking and sort of planning for this session, Scott, one thing you mentioned to me is that as the owner of a win-loss program, you shouldn't have opinions about the data. You should let the data speak for itself.
Yeah.
It can help you continuously get that buy-in. And you specifically mentioned sort of insights versus opinions and knowing how to define between those two. So maybe we can start there and sort of you can provide your definition of an insight versus an opinion, and then we can talk a little bit more about how folks that are either newish or to win-loss or still learning win-loss, how they can better let data speak for itself when they're trying to get stakeholders to keep buying into this.
Yeah, I have a strong philosophical belief that served me really well, which is CI's function should be available to every person across the company. So when you think about what you're typically invited to do with win-loss, you're typically invited to a senior exec forum to present your findings on how things went. First thing is to have some empathy for the executives in the room, right? They're all supposed to own their function. They're all supposed to be delivering all the time. We all know that that's not always possible to do. So someone on the sales side might feel that the reason coming into that meeting, they might feel the reason that their numbers don't look the way they should is because marketing isn't giving them enough top funnel. The marketing leader might be saying, hey, it's not about top funnel. I'm not being funded properly to generate those leads. Finance might be saying, no, we're already spending too much, right? And the CEO is saying, I just want you all to get on the same page so we can decide which direction to go. You're inserting yourself into potentially that dynamic or another that you don't understand. So picking your language carefully and talking with people about the data instead of about what you think the data says is really important. So an example, you could say sales isn't doing what they should be in this region because their number is lower historically, has been trending down the last 3 years, and we need to pay attention to that. I promise you that's an explosive comment, and you're going to get stuck presenting for the next 30 minutes debating that because you've now entered yourself into the politics of whether or not that's actually true, versus saying the data is trending down quarter over quarter for the last 3 quarters. We're seeing weakness in these regions. I looked at the deals. It seems to be these types of deals. Nobody can argue with that statement. That is fact. Now, why that's the case or what we can do about it could still be argued, but you're staying neutral to the data. You're not building any animosity. You're not alienating anyone in the room. And so later you can still talk with that sales leader and they can say, hey, Scott, can you look at this? They can ask new questions about the data. Yeah, but how was it sliced? Did you omit anything? Right? It becomes a conversation around how true that data point is instead of what you as a CI professional think should be done. Let the data speak for itself. Even when you're prompted and they say, do you think it should be this or that? You can say, well, the data suggests that there is a relationship between X and Y. Always go back to the data. Always let the data speak for itself and let people argue about the validity of the data. And then you're supporting that with, here's how it was sliced. Here's how we looked at it. Being transparent. Don't be defensive. If somebody finds something you didn't look at, say, no problem. We'll tighten that up and we'll get that information to the team. But really staying neutral, letting the data speak for itself allows you to maintain a relationship with anyone in the company without alienating yourself in the process of like communicating what you found. And then in terms of insight versus opinion, it's exactly that. You can still share insights, right? You don't have to be quiet and just show a slide, show another slide. You can still say, we noticed that whenever this product was being sold against us, that we had difficulty selling it. There's nothing wrong with like stating this is what we're seeing and here's the correlation that we see. And then saying, it's possible the data set was too small, or this is a wide, very well researched, broad data set. Our confidence factor in this is very high. You're still speaking about data, but it's an extremely valuable insight versus, no, I think that we should do this. Your job is not to think what you should do. Your job is to get better information for other people. And if they ask you your opinion, sure, you can have an opinion, but I wouldn't offer it. I'd let them ask me and stay focused on what does the data say? What are the insights you derived?
I think when we were chatting related to data, you talked about just being really confident, in what you're presenting as well. That's something that's going to keep your stakeholders interested in what you're doing. It's going to, again, like you're going to get that buy-in once they know that you're showing the data, you have the proof, and then you're also just ensuring that you're really confident in what you're presenting, which is an important tip, but it was something that you kind of emphasized, especially as you're rolling out a newer win-loss program, and some execs on the team may be seeing this for the first time, or you're still kind of early on in that.
Yeah, I think grace is a great word. These are just people, right? Yeah, they may have a C-level title. They may have had some wildly impressive accomplishments. But at the end of the day, they don't have the information you have because their job is different than yours. You've focused on studying and really coming up with the right answers. You don't have to have all the answers. That's the first thing. You don't have to have all the answers. Number two, you are actually on equal or better footing than the person that you're serving because you've had more time to look at the data. So you should build confidence just from that. And then third is, in a world where you're forced to make decisions with incomplete data, someone coming to you and offering both more information, insight, and the opportunity to continue to get more is an extremely welcome, right, resource. So if it's your first time presenting to an exec team or standing up this function, or it's your 100th time, it's always good to just come with grace and say, I'm doing the best I can to serve you. Here is what I can tell you right now. I've never had poor reception. I've seen some people become emotional, but that, again, my job is to share what I know. And I've even had other executives say, don't worry about that. It's okay, right? And we'll handle that in our own team. Thank you for presenting. We'll see you next month, or whatever your frequency, next quarter, or whatever your frequency is. And then the last thing is, don't surprise people. Don't surprise people. You should be on a cadence where you can prepare the data, send it out ahead of time, let people look at it. And if there's something you're really concerned about, shop it. Go and talk to that executive and say, hey, I'm seeing this trend in the data. I'm uncomfortable with the story it tells right now. Can you help me figure out like what's wrong? And they'll tell you because they know their deals. They'll say, oh yeah, it was this, or well, if you looked at this and this, that typically skews it, right? They will help you sort that out because they understand that that's eventually going to be a topic of conversation in their peer group. So don't surprise people, put it out, let people look at it ahead of time. It also encourages much better questions, and you move forward as an organization much faster when you do that. So
That's a great tip. Yeah. And I would imagine when you're not surprising people, those like emotional discussions that could happen when you're presenting, it's less, if everyone's had the chance to absorb and, have their questions, you feel confident in the data, you can kind of ensure that might not happen as frequently.
Yeah, and for folks that have more developed programs and are like, Scott, I've done this a bunch, I would say this. In that pre-shopping and that sharing, listen carefully to the follow-up questions they ask. You might have the tooling and the capability to go and like create some slides that you hide that answer those questions. And when they ask those questions of you, right, because they're going to in their own peer group, because they were like, yeah, when I was looking at this, I was thinking about this, you have an answer. So how much credibility do you get when you have these, all of a sudden, these slides prepared to answer a question that wasn't part of the agenda, but is going to be asked, and you're like, yeah, I thought about that too in our discussion. You don't have to tell them I will find the answer. You just need to listen to what their concerns or their insights or their additional questions are. Pick one, pick two of the most relevant, or try to anticipate what the questions might be. Having just one or two of those shows that what you're presenting is not the extent of your depth, right? You've gone that next level down, and the amount of confidence that gives executives about what you're presenting and the amount of research you've done is exponential, right? When people are like, he didn't even know I was going to ask that question, but he had an answer that he or she, that's pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
So I would encourage that too.
Yeah, I love that, having those extra slides at the ready. Sounds like being over prepared, of course, is going to serve you well. Caitlin, do you have any questions that are popping? I can see a couple, I think, in the chat. Any that's sort of relevant to what we're chatting about now?
Yes, we have one from Victoria. When it takes time to get quality data in our CRM, how can we, in the meantime, provide meaningful insights? We could get quick data through a survey to customers after a win or a loss, but what other ideas do you have?
Great question. Data and the richness of your data is always a challenge. I recommend anytime you're starting a program, you start small. So remember what I said. Executives are being asked to make decisions with incomplete information. Anything you do to get them closer, as long as you're transparent about what that actually represents, what's included, what's not, what's the depth of what you were able to understand, is value for them, right? So yeah, a survey after the sale is one example. Anecdotal evidence. So making a routine of talking to sales teams before you put it together and say, what's your sense of what happened in your territory, your region? And saying, the general consensus was this. Basic understanding of like, here's how long your sales cycle is, and here's the opportunity in terms of compressing that, in terms of how many more deals you could close. But if you're looking for tooling, like other sources of information, if you don't have good CRM data for win-loss, but you do have survey data, that's helpful. Third parties, you can hire third parties. There are tools out there. I mentioned one of them earlier, where you can actually record and or get third-party surveys from your customers as well, not just send out surveys, but surveys where people go and talk and ask them, what competitors did you consider? Why did you select this? What did you think about the sales cycle, the way you were engaged? And you can take snippets of those and bring those into the conversation. So if all you have is general trend, enriching the quantity data with the quality data of snippets from your customers, picking the top 2 or 3 deals, talking with those customers, and then saying, they said this is the reason they bought. Sometimes that will illuminate a belief that what we were selling is the best product versus, no, I bought because I believe in your organization and your strategic direction. So like that anecdotal evidence is extremely valuable, and it's relatively easy to access, even if you don't have the empirical data coming into your CRM. Use that for your trending. Go get some qual data to lay against it. That's the great start for more sponsorship and more investment in your program to enrich all of it and become better.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Scott. Do you have any other questions, Caitlin, or should we move on?
We actually do have one on third party from Luke. When he has tried to get an exec sponsorship for win-loss, the questions he got would be, why would a lost buyer talk to a random third party instead of a rep that they've developed a relationship with? Or why would I fund a vendor to go ask questions when I could put money into a BDR?
Very,
Fantastic.
very specific. Okay.
Yeah,
What do you think about
fantastic. But I mean, like totally, and that's how an exec thinks. That's a
Yeah.
totally fair, and I think fair representation. So the first question, why would they talk to a third party and not a rep? The rep has an incentive to buy. When you go to buy a car, do you tell the guy what your, first the question you ask you, well, what's your price range? Oh, well, like, what are terms? How long you gonna own it? Because he's trying to figure out how to make as much money as possible. Most people know that. When they go to buy a car, they don't tell the sales rep everything because they want the flexibility to learn about the opportunity to purchase without being painted into a corner when they're not negotiating price yet. It's the same thing. That buyer understands that the salesperson on the other side is trying to sell them something. And so they're going to withhold information they perceive is in their best interest so that they can get the best price and the best opportunity and the most out of that interaction. A third party, especially after the fact, when there's no deal to be done anymore, can learn more about who you were really competing against, versus who you thought you were, what the price dynamic was, or what the real decision was within the company. Maybe it was purely on price. Maybe it was on service. Maybe they don't want to hurt the salesperson's feelings. How many people in their CRM today have gone in and the reason for loss is I did a poor job? Show me one salesperson that actually signed up and said, nope, I did a horrible job in this sale. You're never going to hear a buyer tell a salesperson your sales process was horrible unless they're just like wildly angry. But you will hear that right from a third party so the incentive for them is, yeah, I want to tell them what they did wrong, but I'm not going to tell the guy who's responsible for it, or he or she, like, I'm not going to do that. So like, there's lots of reasons why a third party is better. And quite honestly, there is a practice, there is a gift, there is a skill set in asking open-ended questions, non-leading questions that end up with you really finding out the truth, right? And that skill set's worth paying for, whether it's you or a third party you're having doing it. And then the second question was about, why would I invest that way versus, doing a business review or a BDR? They serve two different purposes, right? Like a business development representative is looking for new leads and looking to warm leads so they can give them a field salesperson to go and complete a sales cycle with. Yeah, like I totally get it. You want to get revenue in the door, but how many sales calls can you make if your discovery is better? How many sales calls can you make if when you show up, your collateral and your ability to convince is better and your sales cycle is compressed because you're hitting on all the things that person cares about? How many sales calls can you make when you really understand for each competitor how to shift and change your pitch, right? So that you're helping with thought leadership, landing pages, competitive landing pages, better collateral, just messaging in general about thought leadership and their perception of you as a company. And you know what that other side is saying about you, and you're getting ahead of it and sort of changing the way the customer perceives it before they ever even hear that. I guarantee you, your win percentage will go up, right? Your deal cycle will compress and your average deal size will go up because you understand more about what that customer wants and how to match your product to it. So compared to a BDR with just like the top line of like, let me bang the phones and create more top of funnel leads, your conversion percentage isn't changing. You're still converting it 4, 10, whatever your percentage is. And your sales cycle is still extending or staying the same. The investment in CI is a better investment for that salesperson, and that's what sales leader, and that's what you should be telling them.
Great, thanks for that, Scott. Great car analogy. I think we've all been there. One of the scariest experiences trying to buy a car for myself. Yeah. You mentioned one thing as we were talking about step 2 is that you don't have to have all the answers right away, and I think that sort of segues nicely into our last step that we're going to talk through. Is showing incremental success. So when you've run win-loss programs, you typically don't want to boil the ocean when you're presenting. You want to stay focused on tracking one or two things really well. That was something you had mentioned to me when we were chatting earlier. You just want to start, with one or two things really well, again, to get that buy-in and continue that buy-in. Can you talk through a little bit more there on how you prove the value of the program by starting small?
Yeah, and this question actually applies whether you're a big enterprise with an established program or whether you're starting a new program in a company or company size, small or large. I've come into big organizations who have lots of coverage, meaning they track and report on lots of different things, but nobody believes in the quality of the data. And no one's leveraging it or using it because it's too conflicting with other things in the organization. Versus, I've seen organizations that have very small coverage, meaning they only answer 2 or 3 questions, but what they do has a good methodology and it's well researched and it's well presented. And, you're better off to start by adding value people can count on. It's really a judgment on you and on the program you're running. It's not a judgment on the data, right? Your job is to go and provide good information, literally. If you provide less of it, but it's good and high quality, people can depend upon it and make better decisions. But if people do not believe in what you're delivering, even if you deliver a bunch of it, the value of it is low, minimal, actually arguably detrimental because it creates more questions than it creates answers, right? So start small. If you haven't done this before, you're going to have a whole bunch of hurdles you've never anticipated. So set expectations around what you can do. Maybe you don't start doing it monthly. Maybe you don't even start doing it quarterly. Maybe you do it annually or biannually. To start, you can always start. Remember, it's more information they had before, and they'll be grateful, even though they acknowledge the need that they need better frequency or they need more information. But whatever you do, act with class, with transparency, approach it from a professional perspective with every interaction, whether that's a salesperson, whether that's a sales leader, whether that's product marketing, whether that's product, or your senior execs. If you're building, you are selling the reputation of your program on every interaction that you have. And they will tell their bosses and they will talk to each other, and the company will decide culturally if they believe in you and in your program. So you don't have to do a lot. You just have to do it really well. And then build, right? As you build value and people see value, they'll say, I'd love to be answering these questions. You say, I would too, but I have to pick and choose because I don't have enough resource. And then they'd say, well, maybe I can help with that. What would you need? The key is you need to have your ask ready. When you get a senior executive say, what do you need? You need to already know, like, I'd like to have a different tool. I need a bigger budget. I want more third-party market research. I want another person. I want some third-party marketing support so that I can build slides and more collateral. I want more collaboration from product. I want, but your asks and why they're important, so that executive can sit with you, or the people that want to now help you can sit with you and help you prioritize what's most valuable to the org. That's invaluable. You don't want to miss the opportunity. You should have that answer before anybody asks.
So sounds like quality versus quantity when it comes to this incremental success. Make sure you're answering 1 or 2 questions to start really well. And there'll be more interest from your stakeholders. You've sort of like left a crumb that they want to learn more. That's valuable for you. And along the way, just having what you mentioned, like your ask at the ready for when the stakeholders are they're bought into win-loss. You've proven yourself, you've gotten those few questions answered really well. They have more questions, hopefully, so that you can build this program that you can answer, and then have your own sort of resource question or resources that requests and anything sort of ready for when that does come up. I think that's a great tip because I don't think a lot of people think that far ahead. And I know that that's a struggle sometimes, so that's a really good point.
Yeah, and Sheila, I'd say the third point is just remember that incremental success is not just about the insights you provide, but about how you interact in the organization. Low friction, high value interactions, right? Consistency, transparency. That is as much about how people perceive your success as the insights are. So I think it's those 3 things.
Awesome. I'm just checking the time, making sure we leave some time for questions. Are there any questions in the chat, Caitlin, that we haven't addressed yet that we can get to?
I don't have any questions in the Q&A. Connor, do you have any?
I do. I have a few that I jotted down while we were talking about executive sponsorship. Scott, are you okay with sort of going back to that topic?
Sure, Connor, no problem.
I've got a few. I'm going to start at a super tactical level. Let's say someone in the audience, they've identified the person that they think, they've identified someone who may be a good executive sponsorship. Do you have any advice for that, literally that email or that Slack message or that Teams message that they send to that potential sponsorship? Any advice for what they literally say in that message?
Sure. I wouldn't say anything about a program. I wouldn't say anything about, I need you to sponsor me. I would say, I'd like to spend 30 minutes with you and learn more about the types of open questions that you have about your organization and about the company. And I'd like to learn from you, how you're thinking about answering those questions going forward. That's enough of an email that somebody's gonna be like, well, that's intriguing. They're taking personal interest in me, first thing. Second, they're asking interesting questions. Like, I don't know if I have the answer to those. Those are, why are they asking? I would love to know more, right? So they're intrigued. And then when they get in, you say, well, look, I've just noticed that I feel like we're making decisions with less information maybe than we should have. And I'd love to be part of that. But in order to do that, I need to learn more. And also, like, I'm not naive enough to know that there aren't reasons why. I'm just looking for an opportunity to improve this. Would there be value in that? Yeah, for sure. Like, here's the things that I think we all love to know. And you say, okay, well, let me go back again, earning the right to run a program. Nobody's going to say, bless you, and say yes and go it unless you have history and a long resume and you've proven results. Earning the right to run a program is showing value. And then that person's like, I'll step up for you. Yeah, this has been great. I'll step up for you. That's how you get there, right? Showing personal interest, showing insightful questions or the willingness to understand them and what kind of questions they have and help, and then delivering to that is a great way to start.
Gotcha. Thank you. And still on the sponsorship thread, we talked a little bit about empathizing with sellers, spending time with sellers, earning their trust. And I think for the most part, we were talking about sort of top-down sponsorship, which of course you need because you need someone who with influence and authority. But do you think there's a role that bottom-up sponsorship, so to speak, can play, like sort of building a groundswell amongst frontline sellers? Can that be helpful at all? And if so, what would that sort of look like?
That can be tremendously helpful. It can also be a problem. Sales people are the hungriest, easiest audience you will ever have for competitive intelligence information. They are hungry and will do anything they can to learn more about a deal. The challenge is that everybody has a different deal and they don't have any priority. To a salesperson, what's generally most important is what they're doing right now. Right. So it's really hard to tell a growth rep, your deal is not big enough for me to focus on, right? Because to them, it's huge because those are the size deals they're in. Whereas like an enterprise strategic rep has a completely different category. It's not to say you don't serve both. It's just about yes, but, or, hey, maybe there's some resource over here. I like to say yes as much as I humanly can to salespeople to build that groundswell, but also to put in their ear, hey, if this was valuable for you, can you please let people know that this was valuable? Here's the kinds of things you could say that would really help, me build more of this function and program. And they will. They're very vocal, right? So when people are like, what can I do to help? Because every senior leader asks a salesperson, especially a good one, that because they value, they're like, I need more competitive intelligence. We need to fund that team. They will say it. So yes, sales groundswell support can be helpful as long as it's focused and as long as you're picking and choosing like where you make those investments. And keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to give them those insights. You can point them to stuff that's already done, point them to a resource you know about on the web, give them anything more than what they have today, and they will appreciate it. And that'll help you build your program.
Thank you.
Yeah, you
I have
bet.
more if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Let's keep going.
While we were talking about this, I had an idea, Scott, and I would love if you wouldn't mind telling me and everyone else here if you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. Ready?
Okay.
I was thinking about building the case for win-loss, and you were talking about how everyone's got questions that they'd love to have answered, right? So I was imagining if, as part of sort of the business case, if you did a little bit of like a road show, talking to different people, finding out the questions that they'd love to have answered, and literally creating like a document or a slide that shows all the different questions that people around your company would love to have answered, and using that almost as like a proof point of like, hey, there are all these questions that, if answered, would help us be more efficient, whatever, and we can't answer them right now. We could if we made this investment. Now, I'm starting to think this may be a bad idea because it might contradict your start small advice, but I'd love to hear your perspective if you think that could be an effective sort of like a piece of collateral in that business case.
I think if you remember, I talked about like sort of interviewing and talking with people, doing a catalog or a needs assessment within the organization as you start a program. The key question to ask is, if I were able to provide this information to you, what would you do with it? How would it make a difference to you? What would it empower you to do that you can't do today? Right? So you want to kind of build a contract with that person, or at least an understanding of, yeah, this isn't the most important question. It would be useful and interesting to know, but I'm not sure how it would directly affect revenue or directly affect what I would do today, versus someone who knows that. It's like, oh, if I knew that, my win percentage over here would go up dramatically because that's used against me in every deal. Well, one, okay, put that at note. That's a good start of a battle card, or of a body of work. But two, it helps you sort out curiosity and interest versus, which is a human nature thing, versus like things that actually matter. Putting up that slide and saying there's a ton of questions we can answer for a senior exec, they're like, yeah, and right? They don't like, it doesn't resonate. Putting up a slide that says, if I could answer these 5 or 7 things, this would affect revenue, this would affect revenue, this would affect strategic direction, and like tying them back to things that those executives are responsible to do for the company. Yeah, that will get you somewhere, right? Most executives, they work on a line of sight. They have initiatives that they choose for each quarter, half, or annually. They have a planning process. As a CI person or an aspiring CI person, you should know when that planning process is, because you're going to get a lot of airtime before that planning process. And, having that slide right before that, yeah, they've just gone through the process, or just about to go through the process of, again, empathy with the senior exec, having to make decisions with incomplete information, and you saying that could have been better. And here's 5 examples of questions I could ask that would materially affect how you make a decision. You'll get somewhere with that. Just be selective and really understand, how does this affect an outcome? Because even senior execs will ask me questions, curiosity, purely curiosity. And, exploratory conversations are great, but maybe you should visualize the information in a Tableau dashboard, or use Splunk or some other type of tool, so that people can answer those questions and come with hypotheses, or, more well-formed, better questions when they actually come to the table. And that's a whole different side of CI. As you stand up, mature your program, you want to start to build systematic processes and access to information and exploratory tools so that everyone can participate better.
Perfect. Thank you. So for the record, laundry list, not a good idea. A curated list tied to outcomes, good idea.
But it starts with the investigation, the conversations that you were talking about. It's just make sure you're not telling everybody you're going to do everything, because you can't.
Right.
And
Don't boil the ocean. Back to that.
Yeah. Keep it simple and be really good at the stuff you do.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. I think with that, we're going to wrap things up. Scott, thank you so much. You've been a great guest. You've provided so much helpful insight and tips for everyone that is either has a win-loss program or is about to start one, or early phase, wherever you're at. I'm going to give a plug to our next upcoming Win-Loss Wednesday, which is next week. We're going to talk specifically about how to use win-loss to better train your sales team. So to take all those insights and to get more impact from your reps based on what you find. So thanks everybody for joining. Hope to see you at the next one of these. And thanks again to Scott for being a great guest.
My pleasure. Thank you guys, and good luck on your win-loss programs.